Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon. This is Sergio Cavaliere Filho from IFPMA. Thank you for joining the second day of our 2024 Asia Regulatory Conference. Today, we have two sessions focused on regulatory reliance. Session one focusing a bit more on regulatory reliance pathways for initial marketing authorization, and the second one for the product lifecycle, including post-approval changes and GMP inspections. On my next slide, I have an overview of the panel that you'll be hearing in the first session of today with regulators from NPRA, Philippines, FDA, and HSA, and also a representative from IFPMA, and that will be moderated by Alice G from an IFPMA sister association, IFPMA. Just before we kick things off, and I'll give it over to Alice to start the session, just some quick housekeeping remarks. So the conference is held in English. You have all the details about the program, the speakers' biographies available on the website. So that's arc.ifpma.org. All participants are muted, so if you want to engage with the panel, and we do incentivize you to do that, please use the chat function. You can also upvote the questions or like them so that we can see which questions are getting the most traction. We'll also have polls being used during the session, so once those pop up on your screen, feel free to answer so that we can see the different options live during our discussion. We also have the registration still open for all the days of the conference, so in case you want to join other sessions, please go through our program on our website and feel free to do that. And also the session will be recorded, so you will be able to access all the presentations and the recording of each day on the IFPMA Asia Regulatory Conference website after the conference. So with that, I'll hand it over to Alice to kick off session 2 of Asia Regulatory Conference focused on Reliance case studies in the Asia Pacific region. Thank you so much. And Alice, over to you.
Thank you. Hello, everyone, and greetings from Malaysia. We have a much anticipated session on Reliance case studies and lessons learned to start our second day of the ARC. As we heard yesterday, there is a growing use of Reliance, and this includes here in our Asian and Western Pacific region. And this is because no regulatory agency, no matter how well-resourced, can do it all alone in this age and time. This is true for NRAs at all maturity levels, as it is very challenging to accomplish all the regulatory work alone and independently from other regulators. Reliance is, in fact, a win-win-win approach for all stakeholders, for regulators, industry, and also patients, as it facilitates access to quality-assured medicines, supports efficient use of available resources, and can result in faster approval timelines. So for this session, we have with us experts from 3 national regulatory authorities and also the biopharmaceutical sector to explore the evolving landscape of regulatory reliance in Southeast Asia and the Western Pacific region. We will examine the current landscape of reliance in the region, as well as identify and share best practices through real-world case studies presented by regulators from the Philippines and Malaysia, showcasing practical lessons and best practices for implementing reliance mechanisms. We will also discuss key documentation to facilitate reliance and explore the role of assessment reports, product sameness data, and other critical documents in supporting reliance practices with the aim to enhance mutual understanding and trust among stakeholders. We will start with presentations by Mr. Wenzel Esprecht from the Philippines FDA, Dr. Noraisha Mohammed Sani from NPRA Malaysia, and Dr. Celine Bourguignon from GSK on behalf of IFPMA, And this will be followed by a panel discussion with our speakers, along with Dr. Yi-Hu Lui from HSA Singapore. As you can see from the speaker's profile on the ARC website, we have a panel of very experienced and knowledgeable speakers and panelists for our session today. They bring a wealth of expertise and insights that will enrich our discussion on regulatory reliance. So thank you for joining us, and we shall look forward now to an insightful session together. To kick off with our first presentation, let me introduce our first speaker, Mr. Wenzel Esprecht from the Philippines FDA. Wenzel has been actively involved in the implementation of global, regional, and national reliance pathways, namely the WHO CRP, the ASEAN Joint Assessment Procedure, and also the Philippines Facilitated Registration Pathways. With his 20+ years of regulatory experience in the Philippines FDA, Wenzel will now share with us an overview of the implemented national reliance mechanisms in the Philippines and the lessons learned and recommendations for implementing reliance. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Wenzel Esprecht. Wenzel, please.
Yes, thank you very much for the kind introduction, Alice. A pleasant morning, afternoon, and even evening to all the participants from all over the world. Again, my name is Wenzel, and I am from the Food and Drug Administration Philippines, particularly the Center for Drug Regulation and Research. And I'm now here to give you an overview of the FDA Philippines reliance mechanisms for marketing authorization. This is our way of adapting to the changing regulatory landscape. Next slide, please. So for the next 15 minutes or so, I'll be giving you a brief introduction on the agency that I belong to and what compelled us to rely. And I'll go into specific details on the facilitated registration pathways we have adopted and implemented in the Philippines, namely a bridge review, verification review, the WHO Collaborative Registration Procedure or CRP, as well as the ASEAN Joint Assessment or JA procedure. And of course, I will have to share with you the challenges we have experienced, the lessons learned, and our recommendations moving forward. Next slide, please. So just to introduce to everyone, I belong to the Food and Drug Administration Philippines. It is the National Drug Regulatory Authority, or NDRA, under the Department of Health. We are an attached agency of the Department of Health. The FDA Philippines was established way back in 1963, quite an old institution by other standards, and it was based on the Food, Drugs, and Devices and Cosmetics Act, or the Republic Act number 3720. Realizing over the years the need to strengthen our mandate, there was the Republic Act number 9711, or the Food and Drug Administration Act of 2009, wherein our organization was reorganized into 4 distinct product centers, namely the Center for Drug Regulation and Research, or CDRR, the Center for Food Regulation and Research, or CFRR, and then we also have the Center for Cosmetics and Household Urban Hazardous Substances Regulation and Research, CCHUH-SRR, and the Center for Device Regulation, Radiation Health and Research, or the CDRR-HR. Next slide, please. So at the Food and Drug Administration Philippines, or FDA Philippines, we are mandated to protect the general public by ensuring the safety, efficacy, and quality of health products. Our mission as regulators is to guarantee the access of the general public to safe, quality, pure, and efficacious health products through sound and innovative regulations. Our vision for our organization is to become an efficient regulatory agency, providing modernized solutions in ensuring access to regulated health products. And for the good of society, to have a nation with well-informed consumers with access to regulated health products. Next slide, please. So why is there a compelling need for the Philippines to adopt regulatory reliance in the face of changing times? Of course, we don't want to miss the boat in terms of globalization and advancement in drug development, manufacture or production, and distribution. We realize that there is also an increasing trend in regulatory convergence, harmonization, and benchmarking, both at the regional and global level. If to cite an example, we have in Southeast Asia what we call the ASEAN Pharmaceutical Product Working Group, or the PPWG, which is in charge of realizing all the harmonization initiatives, including or counting among its accomplishments are the ASEAN Common Technical Dossier and the ASEAN Common Technical Requirements, or ACTD and ACTR. We also have adopted and implemented the mutual recognition arrangements on the good manufacturing practice, as well as bioequivalent study reports, and more recently, the implementation at the regional level of the ASEAN Joint Assessment Procedure. Of course, we are also well aware at the global level of the WHO benchmarking tool. It is always imperative for us to adopt regulatory reliance because there's a perennial problem of resource constraints at the NDRA level. This can be in terms of manpower or the helping hands we have at the agency, as well as in terms of technical capacity. We also have some inadequacy in terms of infrastructure and equipment, and also the systems in place needed to get going. And of course, there's always the perennial problem of backlogs. For the longest time, we have been bogged down by backlogs, and this is partially attributed to the duplication of assessments already done by competent and stringent regulatory authorities. That's why the realization now for regulatory reliance. And of course, the ultimate objective for us regulators, especially in the Philippines, is to ensure that there is timely access to needed medicines and health products, as well as not only timely access, but also improve availability of these needed health products. Next slide, please. So just to begin with a discussion on our facilitated registration pathways, or FRPs, we have the abridged review. So this is defined by our regulation as a limited independent assessment of specific parts of the dossier or submission for suitability of use under local conditions and regulatory requirements, while relying on prior assessment from a reference drug regulatory agency, or what we call an RDRA, to inform the local decision. So what makes a product eligible for this abridged review? Well, a drug, vaccine, or biological should have been approved by at least one RDRA. So it should be the same as the one approved by the RDRA, including in extended use or indication in the Philippines. So the product information proposed for this particular product should be identical to that approved by the RDRA, in addition to what the Philippines requires in terms of labeling information. And of course, the documentation to be provided to us should be written or translated in English. So what are the key documentary requirements when it comes to submission of a marketing authorization application based on a bridge review? Of course, we need a complete unredacted assessment report and the certificate of pharmaceutical product from the identified RDRA, the complete marketing authorization dossier following ACTD or ICH-CTD, and when applicable, stability studies following climatic zone 4B. Our timeline in the processing of such an application is not more than 45 working days. Next slide, please. So the next facilitated registration pathway I would introduce to you is verification review. This is an assessment process by which the submission has been evaluated and a and approved by at least 2 reference drug regulatory authorities. And the FDA Philippines only validates the submission and ensures that the product conforms to the registration conditions, standards, and requirements as approved by the RDRA. So again, for the eligibility criteria, this should have been approved by at least 2 reference drug regulatory authorities. The product should be the same as the one approved by the RDRAs, including its intended use or indication in the Philippines. And the proposed product information should be identical to that have been approved by the RDRAs, in addition to what we require as country-specific labeling information. And of course, documentation should be written or duly translated in English. So same as that of a bridge review, we need the following as documentary requirements: the assessment report in unredacted form, the CPP from the identified RDRAs, ACTD or ICHCTD, as well as stability studies following climatic zone 4B when applicable. This time around, the timeline for the processing of an application under verification review is not more than 30 working days. Next slide, please. So we have a definite list of 16 reference drug regulatory authorities to be used as reference in our processing of the applications following either a bridge or verification review. So I will not get too much into the details. Next slide, please. So just to let you know about our criteria for the selection of these 16 RDRAs, either they are the founding members of the International Council for Harmonization of Technical Requirements for Pharmaceuticals for Human Use, or in short, ICH, or there are Stringent Regulatory Authorities, or SRAs, or are WHO listed authorities, or WLAs. They can be other national or regional drug regulatory authorities operating at maturity level 4 following the WHO benchmarking tool. So these 16 reference drug regulatory authorities for medicines and vaccines, just to let everyone know, has been or have been unilaterally recognized by FDA Philippines. So having said that, we are currently in various stages of progress when it comes to engaging with them formally via a memorandum of understanding or memorandum of cooperation, specifically the following reference drug regulatory authorities: PGA Australia, MFDS Korea, and PMDA Japan. We hopefully would like to engage the rest of the identified RDRAs in the not so distant future, but knowing that it could be like a painstaking and a tedious process. Next slide, please. So we also have the collaborative procedure. This is an assessment process recognized by the FDA through Reliance, work sharing or joint reviews with other international organizations like the WHO pre-qualification team for medicines or other drug regulatory agencies as may be identified by the FDA. So the drug, vaccine, or biological should have been reviewed through a collaborative registration procedure recognized by the FDA. The product should be the one approved or pre-qualified under CRP recognized by the FDA, including its intended use in the Philippines in terms of sameness. And the product information should be the same or identical with that approved by the RDRA, taking into consideration other country-specific labeling information. Of course, documentation should be written in English or duly translated in English. And our timeline for this particular collaborative registration procedure application is not more than 65 working days. Next slide, please. So we have participated in the WHO collaborative registration procedure via full pre-qualification route. So the Philippine FDA became a participating authority in October of 2015, among the first in the ASEAN region or the Asian region in general. Currently, we have 65 pre-qualified medicines that have been registered following the PQ-CRP, mainly for tuberculosis and HIV and AIDS. And if you would notice the bar graph provided below the slide, we are among the more prominent countries wherein manufacturers and pre-qualification holders are interested in to come and have their products registered in the country. Next slide, please. We have the fourth FRP that we are currently implementing, and that is joint assessment, specifically the ASEAN Joint Assessment Procedure for pharmaceutical products. There are varied application routes concerning applications for following the joint assessment. And these are the responsive application route, the proposed application route, and the invited application route. When doing the joint assessment among participating authorities, we do follow or make use of an online platform that has been developed and currently managed by the WHO, what we call the ASEAN Joint Assessment Integrated Management System, or JAMS. The timeline for participating authorities to process an application following the ASEAN Joint Assessment process is 150 calendar days at the regional level, and at the individual participating authority level, at least speaking for the FDA Philippines, it will take us 30 working days to come up with a regulatory decision on an application following the joint assessment once the joint assessment report has been produced at the joint assessment level. Next slide, please. So we have participated in at least 4 joint assessments, and we have led in one of those. We have served as a lead NRA in one of those. Yours truly being the focal point and the rapporteur for cabotegravir film-coated and prolonged release suspension for injection used for HIV pre-exposure prophylaxis. So there are 3 upcoming products for joint assessment wherein the Philippines will participate. That would be ocrelizumab, Ocrevus, vildagliptin tablet of MacLeod's, and Pfizer's Aztreonam avibactam combination product. Next slide, please. Just to wind down by giving to you what we have experienced in terms of challenges, the lessons learned, and recommendations moving forward. So there's some need to meet the committed timelines. Having seen growing interest from the pharmaceutical industry would expectedly translate to a greater number of marketing authorization submissions. So there is a need for us to address staffing issues internally, including multitasking and competing priorities within the agency to ensure committed timelines are met. So the concept of regulatory reliance is not instilled among all the assessors. So a shift in mindset and attitude among assessors and openness in doing things differently beyond a full review is needed. So this should be complemented by appropriate training and capacity building, as well as guidance documents such as an SOP and perhaps a manual for assessors. Currently, there is no formal channel to communicate and collaborate with the unilaterally recognized RDRAs of FDA Philippines. So we know this is a long and painstaking process, but an establishment of formal working relationships with RDRAs should be helpful and should open a communication channel in the processing of marketing authorization submissions following the FRPs. And noting the relatively high refusal rate of marketing authorization submissions during the pre-assessment and validation stage due to completeness issues, there is a need to continue FDA Philippines advocacy and information dissemination activities for the pharmaceutical industry in order for the latter to meet the former submission expectations. Next slide, please. This would be the last slide. Next slide, please. So we just would like to formalize our participation in the WHO CRP via the SRA approval route So we would need an implementing guidelines in the form of an FDA circular to be able to be fully on board the WHO CRP via SRA, and this is targeted to be issued within 2025, as well as our participation in the ASEAN Joint Assessment Procedure, which remains voluntary in the absence of a specific implementing guidelines, again in the form of an FDA circular. We anticipate having this issuance also in 2025. Next slide, please. So for all our participants interested to know more in detail of what we have to offer the pharmaceutical industry in terms of reliance mechanisms and FRPs, we have all these guidelines, regulations, and guidance documents for your reference. Next slide, please. Thank you very much for your attention, and I will be very much willing to address your questions later on. Back to you, Alice.
Thank you for sharing with us all the Reliance pathways implemented in the Philippines, Wenzel. So, and for our participants who would like to raise any questions to the speakers, please put them in the Q&A box and we will address them later. I see we already have some questions for Wenzel. We will move on to our next speaker, Dr. Noraisha Muhammad Sani from NPRA, the National Pharmaceutical Regulatory Agency of Malaysia. With over 20 years of regulatory experience, Dr. Noraisha has been active in international as well as local regulatory collaborations. She had been pivotal in the development of NPRA's guideline for the facilitated registration pathway utilizing the Reliance approach. Dr. Aisha will now share with us the Malaysian perspective on Reliance. The floor is yours, Aisha.
Thank you, Alice. Assalamualaikum. A very good morning and good afternoon to everyone. First and foremost, thank you to the IFPMA for inviting NPRA to take part in session 1 of day 2 on Reliance case study and lesson learned. So as we all know, many regulatory agencies are interested in implementing Reliance, but how the Reliance model can be practically implemented, especially to use it more effectively in order to speed up the approval of medicine in the country. So today, I wish to share about the Reliance mechanism implemented by NPRA, which is the National Regulatory Authority in Malaysia, focusing on pre-marketing authorization assessment, which is also called Facilitated Registration Pathway or FRP in short. Next, please. So in this 15-minute presentation, I will begin by providing an overview of our previous approach prior to implementing our FRP, along with the detailed step-by-step involved in preparing the framework. Then I will briefly discuss our FRP guideline, what are the key features and the tools that may facilitate Reliance. And then I will then discuss about the challenges that we face and the lesson we have learned from practicing Reliance. And lastly, I will provide several recommendations on what we think are the best practices for implementing Reliance. Next, please. Next. So NPRA has been partially relying on the SRAs for pre-marketing approval and post-market activities, such as on the safety alert and post-approval changes for more than 20 years. For instance, in pre-marketing assessment, we have relied on the GMP certificate for overseas manufacturers issued by any PICS member countries without the need to do reinspection. And we also refer to the public assessment report by the SRAs during the evaluation. However, the lack of a formalized framework for Reliance significantly limits its potential benefit and full implementation. Next. Next, okay. Now I would like to share the step-by-step preparation of the FRP framework developed by NPRA. So prior to 2018, as I mentioned before, we implemented a partial Reliance strategy and continue to conduct thorough assessment. However, in 2018, we received a directive from our top management mandating the introduction of new Reliance pathway. The benefit of Reliance were clearly explained to all relevant staff because this is a crucial step in driving culture change. The next step involved allocating resources and time, as well as establishing a specific task force, which is responsible for preparing the draft guideline. Once the draft has been completed, we then circulated the draft to the stakeholders and engage further with them, providing feedback and clarification to their queries. And based on the outcome of the stakeholder engagement, we finally finalized and endorsed the FRP guideline, the first developed in 2019. Next. Now let's see what are the key features and tools in the National Reliance Framework implemented in Malaysia via the FRP pathway. Next. So as I mentioned, the first guideline was issued in 2019 and served as a trial to sensitize or to familiarize the evaluators with the new procedure. And that is why we can see that we started off with a limited scope of products where it only applies for new chemical entities and biologics, including biosimilar, and also limited reference agencies. The application must be submitted within 2 years from the date of approval by the chosen reference agencies. However, we found that not many products benefited from the pathway due to our limited scope, limited reference agencies, as only 36 products were approved between 2019 to 2023. So this prompted NPRA to timely revise the guideline based on our 4 years experience. Next. So in 2023, we revised the guideline to include more features and tools to facilitate the Reliance practice, such as expansion of the scope of product, addition of more reference agencies or procedures, including an addition of a template for the declaration statement by the applicant, dossier template, and also we include the flow chart in the guideline to provide a better understanding on the overall process of FRP. So this revised guideline is in English and available in our NPRA website. Next. In this revised guideline, with effective implementation starting in January this year, we have expanded the scope of product to include generic medicine and cell and gene therapy product as well. We added 5 more reference agencies, and we included the ASEAN Joint Assessment as well. There are 2 routes that in the FRP that are abbreviated and verification with different timeline, where verification review only apply to ASEAN Joint Assessment. In terms of the eligibility criteria, include that the product must be submitted within 3 years from the date of approval by the chosen reference agencies or procedure, and the product must be reviewed by a full evaluation process where all aspects are the same as approved by the chosen reference agencies, except for container closure system to meet ASEAN requirement, stability requirement, or manufacturing site if it is clearly justified. So for products that have been approved under exceptional circumstances, for example, approved via a conditional marketing authorization, which is normally supported by early phase clinical data like phase 2, while phase 3 is still ongoing, or for product approved via the Reliance pathway, they are not eligible under the FRP. Next, please. So what are the documents required and the regulatory tools? So a full technical dossier will always be required. The important regulatory tools for Reliance are, of course, the assessment report from the chosen reference agencies that include the complete assessment report, unredacted, Q&A document between the applicant and the reference agencies, and also document pertaining to post-approval changes. Other documents to be submitted will also include proof of approval from the chosen reference agencies, and also declarations letter or statement that all aspects are identical to the currently approved by the reference agencies, and also a declaration that the document and information submitted to NPRA are true and authentic. Next slide. Other tools that were included in the revised guideline are a dossier checklist for the applicant to describe the sameness, and in the case if there are any differences between the dossier submitted to NPRA and what has been approved by the chosen reference agencies, the applicant will need to provide justification or explanation in the comment column. And this is dossier checklist is the most important tool for the evaluator, as it will ease the NPRA evaluator for the verification of the sameness and also applying on the risk-based assessment if there are differences declared by the applicant. Apart from that, we also have the flowchart in the FRP guideline to provide the applicant of the whole process involved under the FRP. Next. Okay, other tools that we have to facilitate the review at our end and to ensure consistency among the evaluator is by having evaluators guide or standard operating procedures for our evaluators in implementing Reliance. And at the same time, we also collect question and prepare a FAQ to be published in our NPRA website to give clarity on certain issues raised by the applicant available in the NPRA website as shown on the slide. Okay, next. So while Reliance the efficiency of regulatory processes, particularly by shortening approval timeline, NPRA also faced challenges in its implementation. Next. So the challenges include, number one is about the technical and procedural challenges, because our evaluators initially struggle in adapting to new processes, especially when we would like to balance between traditional full assessment with FRP review. And in addition, to verify the sameness of product is a challenge to evaluators, as it requires detailed knowledge and cross-referencing of dossier, which can be technically demanding. Second challenge is about resistance to change, because during the initial implementation, shifting from traditional evaluation method like full assessment to Reliance-based approach face resistance from some evaluators who are very used to full evaluation method. Number three is about data interpretation and decision making. From our experience, evaluators had encountered inconsistency in data between the dossier submitted by applicant to NPRA as what has been approved by the chosen reference agencies, and also when we compare on the dossier checklist declared by the applicant. We also encountered applicant who submitted variation that has not been approved by the reference agencies. And these issues interfere the overall process, and as we also mentioned clearly in the guideline that during the evaluation process, NPRA has the right to reject the application if there is any discrepancies identified between data submitted and the stated declaration. So we feel that it is the responsibility of the applicant to check thoroughly the dossier submitted and also the dossier checklist, what you have declared in the dossier checklist prior to submission, to ensure the smoothness of the process and to avoid the rejection of the application. Number four, the challenge is on the training and capacity building, because evaluators must develop their expertise in interpreting Reliance-based tool, maintain consistency in applying Reliance procedure across different product and reference agencies, which may be challenging to standardize across evaluator. And hence, training is required to build confidence in using Reliance pathway while maintaining robust regulatory oversight. And of course, other challenges include capacity and resource constraint. Staffing challenges, especially with our limited personnel, may slow evaluation, especially in our current scenario where Reliance Pathway attract a significant of new submission with shorter timeline. Because based on our experience with this revised guidelines starting this year, the number of application more than double as compared when we implemented in 2019 until 2023. So now the number has been increased tremendously. Next. So what we have learned throughout the implementation of Reliance. Next. Based on the implementation of Reliance, we have learned that number one, trust is a critical element because Reliance requires confidence that the regulatory outcome is based on the strong regulatory processes and standards. Reliance does not mean blind trust because evaluators must establish a clear understanding of the reference agency processes and standards to ensure that the information relied upon align with our regulatory framework and public health need. And number two, we understand that verification are crucial step in implementing Reliance. A core principle of FRP is ensuring the sameness of product with those approved by reference agencies. So verification is a crucial step in implementing Reliance, where evaluators must verify that the product submitted to NPRA is identical to that approved by the chosen reference agencies. In the case where differences exist, evaluators must be clearly where differences exist, the applicant must clearly state and justify the reason of the differences. And verification of critical aspect is very important, especially to ensure the reliability and relevance of decision, avoiding the need of evaluating the entire dossier. So number three is about risk management because evaluators should adopt robust risk management strategies for Reliance, with clear criteria to avoid over-dependence on external assessment and ensure critical local context and public safety are not overlooked. And what we learned so far is also about continuous learning and feedback. Reliance should be viewed as a dynamic process because regular reviews of outcome and feedback can help evaluators refine our approaches. So improve efficiency and also address any gap or inconsistencies among us. Next, please. Next. So based on overall NPRA experience from 2019 until now, implementing Reliance effectively requires a transparent framework with clear guidelines and defined review pathways to ensure clarity. And emphasizing verification on the sameness and using standardized standard operating procedure or guidance for evaluators can streamline processes and ensure consistency among evaluators. Using digital platform like NPRA Quest system may help manage submission, track evaluation, and facilitate information sharing while reducing the administrative burden. Additionally, regular training session may equip evaluators with the skill to manage Reliance pathway, interpret reference agency report, and handle complex dossiers. And lastly, continuous monitoring of FRP performance metrics such as registration timeline and stakeholder feedback is also crucial to identify bottleneck and improve efficiency. Regular revision of the FRP guideline by leveraging on the data-driven monitoring, including incorporate evolving international practices, will ensure continuous improvement and timely updating of guidelines. With that, thank you very much for your kind attention.
Thank you, Aisha. It's very motivating for us to see how NPRA has been improving the regulatory procedures too. For our participants here, if you have any question for Dr. Aisha, please put them in the Q&A box. If you have questions for specific speakers, you may indicate or address the questions to the relevant speakers too. And our next speaker is Dr. Celine Bourguignon, currently the GSK Head of Regulatory Policy and Intelligence for Greater China, Intercontinental and Emerging Markets. Celine has a track record of more than 25 years in the healthcare sector, with a long list of accomplishments in leadership roles, as we see in her speaker's profile. Let's hear from Celine now for an in-depth review from industry perspective and how different documents can be used to support Reliance. Over to you, Celine.
Thank you, Alice, and thank you for inviting me to speak to this panel. I'm really thrilled and cannot wait for the discussions we're going to have. But let's get started with the presentation. Can we move to the next slide? So just to set up the scene, right? Why is Reliance important? Applying Reliance mechanism really enables a quicker and more equitable access to drugs and vaccines to populations who need them. And what is exactly Reliance? Reliance is when a regulatory authority takes into account or gives significant weight to assessments that are being performed by another regulatory authority. Though it's not a loss of sovereignty, the relying authority remains independent, responsible, and accountable regarding the decision taken. So if you look at this WHO frame, there's many different regulatory pathways ranging from standard assessment to mutual recognition, right? And Reliance aspect is very heavy in everything that's in the middle. If we can maybe move to the next slide. Industry is strongly committed to bring Reliance into action. And I think Reliance is not a new concept. It's been existing for a long time. Now, COVID-19 and the COVID-19 answer has been a strong accelerator for the effective use of those procedures and gaining traction. Now, I think nowadays Reliance is really something that any authority should have in their regulatory toolbox, right? And depending on what the asset, it's something that you can use as a regulatory authority to streamline the regulatory pathway, be more efficient, and really bring what matters to patients. So our vision is that we want to accelerate access to innovative medicines and vaccines for patients. It's really not the why right now, but rather the how we do it at a broader scale. And again, Reliance, the increased use of Reliance across the entire product life cycle by an array of all maturity levels. So just to be clear, any authority can use Reliance principles, and it's not linked to new application, but also could be linked to post-approval changes, could be applied to post-approval changes, could be applied to batch release testing, to GMP inspection. I think Reliance is rather a mindset than a pathway. And we need to leverage different Reliance tools that really speed up decision-making and reduce duplication of work. There's a couple of enablers on that. So transparency, and I think that was that I cannot agree more with Norashia. Transparency, continuous dialogue are building trust. Trust is a key foundation of applying Reliance. Regulatory convergence is also a key foundation to apply Reliance. Digital support is another one. And that is a collective work. If we can move to the next slide. As that was highlighted before, verification of sameness is essential for Reliance. So WHO has a definition of sameness. And it's very clear that all relevant aspects have to be considered. Composition, strength, pharmaceutical form, intended use, manufacturing process, suppliers, quality of excipients. Okay. But sameness of product doesn't mean dossier sameness. And I think there is a nuance here that was highlighted previously. But global manufacturers provide dossiers that comply with each jurisdiction specific requirements. So there might be differences in dossier, and there is generally differences in dossier. Global harmonization of the dossier structure and content is a work in progress that's not completely aligned. Differences of documentation should not preclude from using Reliance approaches. Here, what we need is transparency on the elements that are different, on the differences, and we need a risk management approach to those. There might also be differences in the level of details provided, but essentially the same quality attributes apply. So in new applications, for example, the dossier submitted to the relying authority will be embedding variations that have been submitted after the initial SRA approval and may differ from the assessment report. So if you're submitting a dossier 3, 4 years, 2 years, even 18 months after the first worldwide approval, it's likely that you will have a list of variations. Among those, some of the variations could be minor variation that wouldn't be reflected in the assessment report. So it's necessary to highlight them and being transparent about, the list of variations and what is different from the first dossier you've submitted in the reference agency. On post-approval changes, it's even more difficult because the lack of alignment on classifications and timeline for variations globally may lead to dossier differences, dossier lag, and supply issues. If you have more changes and you're using Reliance, but there are more changes needing prior approval with slower approvals compared to your reference agency, then those dossiers are behind, and that increases the risk of supply shortages if they're not approved before your inventory is depleted. So that is one factor creating potential supply issues, and applying Reliance to post-approval changes is really a smart way to reduce those potential supply issues. If we can go to the next slide. So I'd like to draw some attention on the outcome of 2 recent CRS survey on the documentation. So this survey that was presented in Sao Paulo in a 24 in a workshop that took place this year, the question was, why would an agency request non-public document? And you can see here that most of the time it is to confirm the sameness of product. So the verification of the sameness of product is really one of the critical elements in a successful Reliance pathway. If we can move to the next one, there was also another CRS report which has looked into the usefulness of public assessment report in the context of a Reliance procedure. And they had looked at 7 reference agencies, and the goal was to compare the reference agencies' public assessment report between themselves and to assess whether the information needed for Reliance is included. So they've looked into 33 public assessment reports for 6 new active substances, and they assessed them against a CRS generate list of information that they consider of value for risk-based reviews. And as you can see, I think you have to look at the green and the blue bar. The gray is really where it's not described or there were some details missing. But you see 2 things. FDA, IFPMA public assessment reports are very complete. They're providing most of the information you need in a Reliance procedure. And the level of information that's not provided is very low. And without surprise, this is within CMC and non-clinical section that contains the least amount of Reliance relevant information. But this information is presented in the CTD. So I think you need to look into, the information globally as a whole in all documents provided, and be mindful about what documents is used for what purpose and contains what information. If we go to the next slide. So this is a piece of work, and my colleague Isabel here on the panel has made a tremendous job in pulling that together. It's a cross-industry work on the documentation. It specifically refers to IFPMA as a reference agency, but it was looking into all the documentation that is potentially released by IFPMA, provided in the context of a marketing authorization, and look into what type of information is provided. So I think there's a couple of conclusions from that. One is several documents are potentially providing the same information. And you can definitely use some of this documentation interchangeably to provide the same data. So, for example, if I take a CPP would contain the same information that's provided in an approval letter and a GMP certificate. And providing all of those documents is really a duplication of information. And maybe to streamline the process, then there needs to be a further understanding of the exact content of the report or the document, and some flexibility into the type of information that the authority wants to see. So there's probably further work to be done on understanding better the documentation and streamline the documentation to incentivize the use of Reliance. If we can move to the next slide. Why is this important? Because in the verification of sameness, you're ending up in potentially different situation. One is the dossier or product sameness cannot be demonstrated, and here a Reliance procedure cannot be applied. It's very rare. You're in a situation where identical dossier and sameness of product could be ascertained, could be verified. It's also pretty rare that you would have the exact same dossier. But there is a range of situations where yes, you can verify sameness, but there are some dossier differences. Here, Reliance can be applied. Reliance is not an all or nothing, but you need to look into the dossier, look into the differences, and assess whether those dossier differences can be justified or need a limited review on this particular section of the dossier. If we can go to the next slide. So IFPMA has developed, a template to be transparent about highlighting differences. And it's basically to allow the authorities, the relying authorities, to look into the potential differences and, focus their attention and their review on those differences, their justification to facilitate the decision on whether a risk-based approach could be taken. So you will find the link on the IFPMA template, and I think if we can move quickly through the two next slides, they're just showing what the description of differences, what the template is looks like. So if we can move further, yes, and with that, I would encourage you all to have a look and to use this template, which to provide greater transparency and hopefully to provide for more efficient of Reliance procedures and build trust among stakeholders. If we can go to the next slide, I think I would like to thank you. And Alice, back to you.
Thank you, Celine, for the informative and valuable sharing. it was very interesting to hear that verifying product sameness is not a simple yes or no answer, and that it helps to have a common harmonized template such as the IFPMA template to provide transparency of differences. So let's move on then. For our participants here, if you have any questions for the speakers, please put them in the Q&A box. You can also upvote a question that has already been raised by liking that question. And now, before we start our panel discussion, we would like to conduct a poll to get feedback from participants here with us today if you have experience with Reliance-based regulatory procedures. So for industry, this will be in Reliance submissions, and for regulators in Reliance review. So please answer the questions that has popped up on your screen. Right. So if we can see the poll results, we have quite a number of yes. I think about more than half of our participants here have experience with it. And so seeing this number of participants having experience with Reliance-based regulatory procedures, I expect that this number will keep growing and growing as we get more familiar with all the different pathways available. And let's move on to our panel discussion now. And our three speakers, Mr. Wenzel Esprecht, Dr. Noraisha, and Dr. Celine, will be joined by Dr. Yihu Lui from HSA Singapore for this panel discussion. A warm welcome to Dr. Lui, who is the Deputy Director of Therapeutic Products Branch of the Health Products Regulation Group in HSA. Hi, Dr. Lui. As the regulator in HSA, could you share with us briefly on how HSA applies Reliance? And could you give us a brief overview of the different approaches currently in place?
Thank you, Alice, and thank you to the organizers for the invitation to this program. So I'll start with illustrating Singapore's challenge, and similar to a lot of agencies, we are small agencies with limited resources, and hence it's impractical to repeat evaluation that has been performed by other major agencies. And we are cognizant of these limitations many years ago. Hence, we have introduced the verification route since 2003, which is more than 20 years ago. So this approach it's where we could leverage approvals or review done by reference agencies in order to minimize duplication of effort. The concept is very similar to what has been described by my colleagues here. For products that has been approved by reference agencies with reference agency approval, company could apply through the verification route to us, and the product has to meet certain eligible criteria, for example. And with this, we would do a Reliance approach where we will leverage on the assessment that's done by the reference agencies, and the evaluation timeline would be compressed compared to other available timelines. So this verification route is a truly Reliance approach, and it's available for new drugs, NDA new drugs application, as well as generic drugs applications. This approach is also extended to post-approval variations such as new indications, as well as changes in CMCs. So in a nutshell, this is the Reliance model. It's risk-based evaluation model, and it remains the most pragmatic approach that enables us to optimize our limited resources effectively while ensuring that the robustness of our regulatory process. So I'll stop here. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Lee, for giving us a clear insight on the Reliance approaches in Singapore. Let's also get further insight on the industry's viewpoints. So I would like to ask Celine, what does industry expect from a Reliance-based procedure? What are the drivers for industry to select Reliance or standard national pathways?
Thank you for the question, Alice. So I think industry is looking into speed and efficiency, right? So I think what we're looking at is really, having an approval, being able to bring innovative medicines quicker to patients who need it. The other thing is the efficiency, right? What we need to is really try to bring as much as possible use the same information, everywhere, right? And I think we're looking into the entire life cycle. So the decision to use a Reliance pathway for the original submission is also heavily dependent on whether we will be able to use this Reliance procedure for the life cycle management of the process and for variations, because here I think it makes a huge difference. Again, so you have to look at it not only from the original marketing authorization, but across the life cycle. And I think one other question is whether it's possible to use Reliance mindset for things like batch release testing, for things like GMP inspection, and so on. Because when you're using a Reliance mindset across the board for the life cycle, then yes, it brings a lot of efficiency to the submission. And it really allows us to go faster, provide a product, and making sure we reduce supply disruption.
Okay, thank you, Celine, for sharing that insight. For our next question, we had noted that there are many challenges with implementation of the various Reliance pathways. So I would like to first ask our regulators here and then ask Celine for the industry comments. Is there something the pharmaceutical industry could do to address current changes? Aisha, you had mentioned in your presentation that there are many challenges, for example, in documents submitted with inconsistencies in data. Can you share your thoughts on how industry can support Reliance and help address current challenges that you face?
Yeah, thank you, Alice. As I mentioned before, some of our evaluators, not everyone, they noticed that based on the dossier checklist, the one that been declared by the applicant, whether there is sameness or any difference with their dossier submitted to NPRA, we noticed that what has been declared is not what has been submitted in the dossier, because there's quite a number of post-approval changes, of course, after the approval, which has not been declared in the dossier checklist. So that is one of the challenges that we need to go back to the applicant and seek clarification. Of course, in the initial stage, we do not reject straight away, even when we notice all the discrepancies. So in addition to that, we also noticed that even for post-approval changes that has not been approved by the reference agencies also being submitted to NPRA when we cross-reference with the dossier. So what we can, maybe we can share with you our expectation is that first, I think the applicant must really check thoroughly what has been submitted and what has been declared in your dossier checklist. And I think this is very crucial because otherwise it will defeat the purpose of Reliance, because we are taking so much time on the verification on something that we're afraid that we might miss, So I think moving forward, we really need applicant cooperation to look through every single detail in the Annex or Annex 2A or Annex 2B for the dossier checklist that we require for you to declare everything on the differences especially, and maybe you can put the reference where we can look into the document, because we also put in our FAQ how the applicant will need to fill in the dossier checklist to ease the evaluator to cross-check the dossier. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. We have many industry members in our audience today who are eager to learn how we can do better for our Reliance submission. So thank you again for that, Aisha. Wenzel, you had also highlighted several challenges in your presentation, one of which is that there is a relatively high refusal rate for submissions during the pre-assessment and validation stage due to completeness issues. So there is a need to continue FDA Philippines advocacy and information dissemination activities for the industry to note the FDA submission expectations. Is there also something the pharmaceutical industry could do to address these challenges that you face?
Yes, thank you very much for that question, Alice. I fully agree to what have been shared by Dr. Noraisha earlier. Well, in my opinion, it's not always the blame being pointed at the pharmaceutical industry. Maybe regulators would need to look into themselves also. Perhaps regulations are vague, implementing details are not there. These are the things that we need to look into. Maybe industry has having difficulty understanding what we really expect a submission coming from them. And that's why I specifically mentioned in my slide that it's not the industry who's always has to bear the burden of proving that they have submitted what is expected to be submitted coming from them. Regulators should also, like Celine has highlighted, product sameness does not mean it should be like the same exact dossier coming from the reference authority. So regulators has to tweak something in their point of views, in their minds, that it's not always expecting whatever has been submitted to the reference regulatory authority should be exactly the one to be submitted with the relying authority, like FDA Philippines. Well, having said that, we strive to commit. I mean, it is our commitment here in FDA Philippines to as part of our responsibility to do advocacies, to do information disseminations. Even as evaluators, we are involved in information dissemination activities with the pharmaceutical industry colleagues for them to appreciate more, understand more what we need coming from them in processing applications, not only FRPs, but other applications that we receive on a daily basis here in the Philippines. Thank you.
Thank you, Wenzel. So it looks like we need to work together and get a better understanding from both sides what we would need to do. Let's also hear from Yihu on this. Do you share what has been highlighted and what other comments would you like to add?
Thanks, Alice. I think it's very, very appropriate what has been shared. It's important for the industry to understand the requirements or for example, the eligibility criteria for certain Reliance route for certain in that sense, constant communication between industry and the regulators are important. I mean, there may be an issue where the regulations are not clear, guidelines are not clear. I mean, this could be addressed by regular interactions between regulators and the industry to improve understanding of the requirements and what and as well as the the challenges faced by industry. So I think by working hand in hand, we could get this understanding better, and this would definitely help in terms of addressing the challenges that we face.
Thank you, Yihu. And Celine, as you rightly highlighted on your slide, industry is strongly committed to bring Reliance into action. So from the industry's viewpoint, how do you think the industry can address these implementation challenges?
So I think there is a need for further collaboration between regulators and industry. And I think we should be clear on, those dossier differences and highlight. Just coming back to Dr. Norashaya, we've submitted a Reliance procedure in which between the submission in the relying agency and the submission in the reference agency, we had, I think, 25 variations. Not all being major variations, some of them being minor variation, which is under the European framework, do and tell, right? For which we don't have an assessment report. We just don't have the document from the agency. But I think some clarification for the relying agency on what to expect depending on the type of change and lifecycle management, a better visibility on how reference agencies are handling those would also help, right? So I think I would agree. More work in that space, more understanding of the reference agency's practices, and see what we can do as stakeholders between industry and regulators, reference authorities, to make those things more transparent. Because I think what we all want is transparency, right? And again, there will be dossier differences. We just need to get better in and clearer on what they mean. Do they mean something? And how to look at them. And I think understanding better what is the practices in documentation from the reference agencies would strongly help everyone getting a better understanding and working together to get a proper alignment on how to handle those differences.
Okay. Thank you to all our panelists for sharing your thoughts on how the current changes can be addressed. These are very good food for thought, especially for industry participants. And we can all look at ways to overcome these difficulties. I think we have a number of questions in the Q&A box too. And some has already been answered by the speakers. And we see a hot question in there is there an expectation in future that an access review with subsequent national approvals would be accepted for a facilitated or Reliance review? Maybe Yihu, would you like to answer this?
I haven't seen the question yet. Can someone repeat it, or I'm trying to look for it at the Q&A. Or can you repeat that question?
Yeah. Is there an expectation in future that an access review with subsequent national approvals would be accepted for a facilitated Reliance review?
I think to clarify for the person that asked this question, and I don't really understand. I mean, what Reliance I'm referring to is a unilateral Reliance. So the access, to explain, the access consortium review is the work sharing pathway between the access consortium. It is not a Reliance-based approach instead. So I do not understand the question that clearly. So I wouldn't be able to address it. But you could clarify it a bit more on the question.
Yeah, maybe we can get the person who asked it to give more details in
Yep.
the Q&A, and then we can take a look at it again.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
But maybe Alice,
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
I understand the question whether in future whether we can accept the access consortium for us to rely on their decision.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Probably that that is also how I would guess, how the question is coming from. Would you have something to add to this?
For me, I mean, my personal view is that always if there is any new proposal, we will need to have a look at the assessment report first and foremost for us to decide further whether we can include this in our next revision. Normally, yeah, that will always what we do if there is any proposal to include a new referral agencies or new procedure.
Yeah, thanks, Aisha. Anybody
Yes.
wants to, Vincent?
Yes, if I can add to that, having heard like a broad explanation yesterday about the Access Consortium, I know it's composed of 5 very good regulatory authorities. I believe that on a personal note, I believe that it's not impossible for us to have members of Access or products that have been approved by the Access Consortium will be able to join our facilitated registration pathways, noting that, of course, after having done the work sharing part, individual members of the Access Consortium should have to come up with their own assessment reports, right, at the national level.
Yeah.
And our primary requirement to be qualified for FRP processing would be that assessment report. And if there is a mechanism for member authorities of the Access Consortium to have this shared through the applicant or to have it shared directly to FDA Philippines through a binding memorandum of understanding or cooperation or agreement, then it is not unlikely that member authorities of the Access Consortium could come on board as part of our RDRAs. I hope I answered even partly the question. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Renza.
Yeah.
So in view of the time, I think we'll just take one last question. And I see another hot question here is asking NPRA whether you can share SOPs or insight with the DAV about Reliance, as DAV is in the process of implementing Reliance. Aisha, what would you say about that?
Yeah, thank you. I saw many interests about our SOPs. Of course, now the SOPs is only limited to our evaluators. This is an internal documents. As for regulators like DAV, you can contact me directly. Like for the industry, I also noticed that you also asked whether you can have it. I think we can perhaps put some of the important things in our FAQ based on several queries that you ask, how we do verification and so on. Maybe we can summarize it and put it in the FAQ. But the SOP, unfortunately, is not traditional the industry, but we will try to take it some of the important Gs and perhaps put it in the FAQ. And also, Celine, I just also would like to comment on the PAC. Of course, we understand that not every variation will have the assessment report, especially the minor variation and also the notification. And I think it is good to highlight that other than assessment report, we also accept the approval letter, and for the notification, perhaps the proof of submission would be sufficient. And this information, I think we will also will include this in our revision of our FAQ.
Yeah, thank you very much, Aisha. So I think this has been an impactful session, and several key points have emerged as we explored the real-world case studies and learn from our expert speakers and panelists during the session today. And let's delve into some actionable recommendations that can help shape the future of regulatory frameworks from our key takeaways and insights to wrap up the session. Can I have the wrap-up slide, please? Yeah. So I think first, we should strengthen regional cooperation through standardized documentation access. We have to develop frameworks for sharing essential documents, such as assessment reports and GMP certificates across NRAs. We can create efficient, mutually beneficial frameworks that are adaptable to each country's unique context, leveraging lessons learned from the various platforms. And we should also integrate Reliance as a strategic tool with consistent training programs. Reliance should be embedded as a core element of the regulatory toolkit to enable risk-based decision-making and to optimize resource use. Reliance should not be limited to specific pathways, but integrated across regulatory functions through structured processes and capacity building efforts. There is a need to also support regular training programs for both regulators and industry stakeholders. And this can be on applying Reliance models, interpreting shared documents, and using international harmonized guidance. And we see the WHO's regional Reliance workshops are a great example of collaborative training approach, which also raise awareness about Reliance and its advantages and implementation status globally. And thirdly, we would establish best practices for documentation formats and use. We should develop global best practices for regulatory documentation that are aligned with risk-based principles and internationally recognized standards. This includes fostering a better understanding of documents provided by the reference agencies, for example, approval letters, assessment reports, GMP certificates, and product information, and also their respective roles in supporting Reliance. Regulatory authorities can ensure flexibility in their Reliance strategies by clarifying what information each document offers and how it can be leveraged effectively, and adapt the sources to fit specific needs. And practical examples in the Asia region has highlighted the benefits of Reliance-based approaches, demonstrating how simple yet robust documentation can support sound risk-based regulatory decisions and thus enable faster access to innovative medicines globally. So this session has indeed been a fantastic opportunity for all of us to gain insights into shaping regulatory framework for the future. And to conclude the session, I would like to extend my heartfelt thanks to our esteemed speakers and panelists for their insightful contributions. Thank you, Wenzel, Aisha, Yifu, and Celine. Also, a big thank you to all our participants for taking the time to join us and for your engagement in this session. Let me now pass back to Sergio. Back to you, Sergio.
Thanks, Alan. So that will close session 2, and we'll go to coffee break, and we will be back at 9:15 Central European time. Thanks, everyone.
Hello, everybody. I want to welcome you to the second session of today, which is the Reliance across the product lifecycle. We will have 3 great speakers for the session today from the Egypt Drug Authority, from the company Merck, and from the Therapeutic Good Administration in Australia on behalf of PICS. And afterwards, we will have a panel discussion on more details. Next slide. For a brief introduction, we want to see what is the possibilities for Reliance across the product lifecycle. Is it possible? What do we mean with that? Actually, for each product, we have one control strategy and one dossier, which is assessed by multiple countries. And each country may have an additional point to make and change something, let's see, in the specification, as you see here with the different color codes in the dossier. At the end, it goes to one manufacturing process, whatever is suggested by the different agency. And the one manufacturing process, if there's any change, you may have again additional changes. But these changes are approved post-approval, and then comes again to one quality strategy, because at the end, the patient receives the products from one manufacturing process wherever they are in the world. And this manufacturing process is controlled by inspections for GMP, good manufacturing practice, and GDP, good distribution practice. And what does this inspection do? This inspection too make all a case, which means they check the capability of manufacture, the adequacy of controls, the suitability of the equipment, and the effectiveness of the quality management system or the product quality system. And this at the end is also the check on the compliance with the dossier and that changes are appropriately managed. So why we need so much effort country by country, and what are opportunities for Reliance to make it possible across the product lifecycle? Therefore, we have 3 speakers. And next slide, I want to just introduce our first speaker, Hemal Sharif from the Egyptian authorities, to talk about an overview of implemented national Reliance mechanisms with a focus on post-approval changes. So Hamada, the floor is yours.
Good morning, everyone. I am Hamada Sharif, Chairman Associate for Updating and Evolving Registration Systems and General Manager for Human Drug Registration, Egyptian Drug Authority. I am very pleased to be with you today to share our practices in Reliance within EDA, Egyptian Drug Authority, and get to know the practices from others and the best practices in post-approval changes and in new registration. Next, please. Today's agenda will have 3 main topics. First, development of Reliance in EDA. Second, the scope of Reliance application within EDA, types and routes of implementation of Reliance, and case study to show the impact of Reliance, and EDA achievement in Reliance post-approval changes, and the challenges of implementation of post-approval changes in Reliance that we have faced in EDA within our application of Reliance. Next, please. Let me first take you to the history and the development of Reliance in EDA. EDA was established in 2020. Before EDA, the Reliance was introduced only in the new registration process of pharmaceuticals, and it was concentrated on decreasing time, especially for registration of product approved by either FDA, US FDA, or IFPMA. After its establishment, the EDA chairman released the ministerial decree to allow for practices of Reliance in 2022. And it is very important because the legal provision is the main pillar in Reliance practices. Then this decree allowed to us more agility in implementation by allowing the release of regulatory guide to give more detailed description of Reliance rules and practices. Next, please. Now we have reached the fourth version of regulatory guide. In this fourth version, we have added the Reliance-based review pathways and its eligibility criteria. We have added submission requirement for each pathway, and we have updated list of our reference countries. Next. Why we have updated list of reference countries to get the most current and higher practices in all over the world. Now we have 22 countries. After updating this list of reference countries, we are now 24. We have updating the criteria in the following matter. For any SRA for EDA, it has to be ICH member and WHO listed authority and acquired maturity level 4 benchmarked by WHO. Next, please. As I said in the bot, we only have Reliance in new registration. Now we have Reliance in both new registration and life cycle management, and it is applied for imported finished product approved by SRAs. Next, please. This slide shows the Reliance in new registration, and it is the most common Reliance we all use. We have two routes in assessment, verification route and abridged route. In verification route, it is not a scientific assessment, it is an administrative process. Product must be approved by at least 2 SRAs or 1 SRA and WHO BQ. In the abridged route, it is limited scientific assessment, and the product is approved by at least 1 SRA or WHO BQ. In both pathways, valid CBP and the proof of approval of SRA or WHO BQ must be present, and the verification of sameness through letter of sameness and unredacted assessment report is applicable. For this Reliance pathway in new registration, it is the easiest way that we all use, but we don't register product every day. The most important is the post-approval changes, because we are in a dynamic process and in dynamic world. We cannot stop only for new registration. So we moved to post-approval change. Next, please. This is the Reliance in post-approval change within EDA. We have clarified our eligibility criteria for Reliance evaluation route, and it is part of our variation guideline. And it is clear for imported finished products that have been approved by at least 1 regulatory authority or WHO BQ. And we have clear submission criteria for post-approval changes Reliance. First, the applicant must submit the following: valid certificate of pharmaceutical product, updated relevant sections of CTD dossier, verification of sameness, for example, sameness letter, unredacted assessment report, otherwise justified with evidence, proof of approval of at least one reference country. Next, please. In Reliance and post-approval change, the EDA acknowledged the difference evaluation criteria, variation categorization, and approval between each individual SRA, as well as difference between SRA and EDA procedure. Example, but not limited to, the difference between EMA and US FDA evaluation procedure as in shown in table. Let me stop here and tell you what is the main challenge and main practice that we have faced, and that's why we have added this paragraph to our guideline. The post-approval changes are not like CBP. You got CBP, you know the product is registered, and you know every small detail for the product. But in every authority, the variation may have different pathways, may different categorization. That's why we have added this paragraph to clarify for any applicant that we are open to accept the approval from SRA as long as it is submitted according to the Reliance evaluation route. Next, please. This small example, it is done by one of our applicant, and it shows site master post-approval change under Reliance evaluation route. As we can see, it is a comparison between the standard route and the Reliance route. First, what are the Reliance documents? In a standard route, there is no document. In Reliance pathway, there is 3 documents: the US FDA approval on the change, a declaration on differences between Egypt and USA package. The package in the standard route was customized to be submitted into 3 different departments within EDA. Now in Reliance evaluation route, the full FDA package is submitted to 1 department only. In the standard route, many questions and answers are raised by the health authority. In the Reliance pathway, no questions and answers raised by the health authority. They fully rely on FDA package. And it is the most important, the timeline. In the standard route, it was 9 months, while in Reliance evaluation route, it was only 2 months. In the standard evaluation route, there is post-approval commitment to make analysis and stability. In Reliance evaluation route, there is no post-approval commitment. What is the impact? And this is the most important, the impact on supply. In the standard evaluation route, no release of the patches reflected by the change until commitments are fulfilled. In the Reliance evaluation route, immediate release of patches and enhance in supply to secure the patient. This is a great example to show the effect of Reliance in post-approval changes. We are talking about decreasing the time by about 85% from the normal practice. Next slide, please. This slide shows the impact of Reliance since May 2023. We have used the Reliance evaluation route to release 164 approval for new registration. What about the post-approval changes? Our main concerns. We have approved 100 post-approval change in Reliance evaluation route. As we can see, they are different. We have different number from Swissmedic, Germany, IFPMA, FDA, Sweden, Mehra, etc. I want to clarify 2 things in this slide. These 100 approval are considered about 70% of application submitted to EDA for post-approval change in Reliance pathway. We approved 70% and we rejected 30%. I will talk to reasons for rejection later. But let me clarify that we are aiming in EDA to increase the percent of approvals for post-approval change from 70% to 85% by the end of 2025. As we can see, the numbers are diverse between different authorities. That's because in Reliance of post-approval change, we have main challenge that there is no CPP standard procedures like in registration. It is just registered here, so you can accept. No, in every regulatory authority, we are dealing with its application. We need first to learn about the application form and how to learn this application form to the approval and the content of application form and the content of approval. So for every authority, we need to make our own practice to get to know about the approval of authority and the application of authority and the correlation between the content of both and the cycle in between. As long as we go with Reliance, the applicant need to help us and need to get us to know about the practice of these authorities. We don't all know the process. That's why we can see the diversity in the numbers. All this diversity is related to the number of products submitted also. Next slide, please. And this is one of my favorite slides. Why we make Reliance. Reliance means faster and sustainable access to medicines. For industry, it is easy to know that we make Reliance, we decrease the repetition if performing studies, and we save time and cost. But for authority, why I do Reliance in post-approval changes or in any other aspect like new registration? First, it helps in assessor building capacity and the updating of the national guidelines to latest standard. Second, it makes us focus our human and physical resources on local production. Third, and it is one of the most important pillars, are the better knowledge of the practice of mature or stringent countries, which paving the road for relying countries to get WHO maturity level 4 and also be one of WLAs. Next slide, please. The main challenges that we have faced within application of Reliance in post-approval changes are here. First, different dates of submission between authorities. For this, let me clarify an example that have been faced with us during Reliance application. You may have a product with more than manufacturing site. In day one, you register this product with manufacturing site 1, and then you need to add a manufacturing site 2. But in the new registration of this product in the stringent regulatory authority, it was part of market authorization, not a Reliance. So there is a conflict between the practice of new registration and post-approval change. So we encourage all the applicants to submit whole package of new registration to the authority in the first day, so Reliance go with the same way. Second thing is different packaging of post-approval change to different authorities. This part is also important. We have faced challenges that for product X, you submit this change in the country in day 1, and it was accompanied by 3, 4, 5 other changes. Then you submit to EDA this only change. When I review your pack of changes, I found difference. So I cannot make Reliance. I have to take the approval as is. I cannot make practicing of this approval into several parts. The third thing, and that's why we are here today, is the lack of clear guidelines of post-approval change Reliance practice. There is no one tell you have to review the approval as 1, 2, 3, and it will contain 1, 2, 3, and you will get the approval like 1, 2, 3. It is not like that in post-approval changes. In new registration, it is easy. The product is registered in IFPMA, so you get the CBP from IFPMA and you register the product. In post-approval change, it is not like this. You have to dig deeper and make your own practices to get to know how to make a link between the submission of post-approval change and the approval. Fourth, and it is one of the measures that we have faced, is the mindset of assessors. For any assessor, he will accept post-approval change if he know that it contains the same requirement of his national guideline, or if it contains more. But what if contain less? We have to train our assessor to accept the Reliance pathway and get to know what is the content of this approval and update their practice according to this practice of stringent regulatory authorities. Thank you all, and I am happy to share any questions with you second.
Thanks so much, Hamada, for this clear overview how the Egyptian authority applies Reliance. And also with your challenges, I see that there are many steps to do, especially the lack of clear guidance. And may I invite the next presenter, which is Isabel from Merck representing IFPMA, to give more insights from the industry perspective on global frameworks for post-approval changes, here with the focus on biological products. So Isabel, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Stefan, and thank you for the invitation for this really very interesting session on Reliance. So if you move to the next slide, I will present first some practical consideration that IFP has worked through. So there are key elements to consider when implementing effective regulatory reliance, and we have learned about them during the past session as well. First, to have guidance on documentation, so to have clear guidance on what documents are required for the use of the assessment, and also clarify who is providing which documents, so if it's the industry or if it's the reference authorities. I think that this is super important to have this transparency, to have on the website this guidance or Q&As for industry or anyone to be able to understand what they need to provide. And most importantly for PACS, because PACS is really even more complex. We just learned from Amala in his presentation. There are various documentation depending on the risk categorization of the change, and also if they impact or not the PI or the context of the change. Then with regard to the timelines, for sure, regulatory reliance should result in a reduction of timeline, and we have seen some examples from various authorities today, and that's what makes its attractiveness for use. And this is very important for supply chain and to sustain, in fact, the supply, because we know that 80% of our work is focused on life cycle, and CMC specifically changes over time. That's why the predictability of the timeline for reliance is a key element for supply chain sustainability. And then other consideration, and Celine and others have hammered that reliance-based regulatory procedure, they can be implemented for MAA, but they can be also implemented at many stages in the product life cycle. So for example, we've seen now some practice for reliance for clinical trials in those health authorities that have presented also in the first session. We have seen also reliance for PACS, and this is what we talk about today in this session, but also reliance for QC testing and batch release for vaccines, for example. And what we think is very helpful is to have pilot programs for applying these reliance-based regulatory procedures. And this helps also train both industry and assessors on what are the useful documents, how to conduct. We have seen IFPMA pilots that are super helpful for CMC change and CHIP, so the industry pilot as well. And we have seen also some individual industry pilots. There are 9 of them right now with various reference countries for applying PACS reliance and to share lessons learned and awareness. So that being said, if we move to the next slide, today I will focus on a study that we have done with the help of Clarivate. We, as IFPMA Quality Manufacturing Working Group, we have done this study to review the available regulatory frameworks on post-approval changes in 21 countries worldwide. So you can see the list of countries in the table on the right-hand side. This spans from ICH members to ICH observers, as well as non-ICH members in all the 3 regions of international countries, so Asia Pacific, Latin America, and Middle East and Africa. And the purpose was not based on our industry experience, but to really study what are the regulation and guidelines available in those countries. And then in a second step, to compare the level of convergence or divergence of these specific PACS regulation and guidance for biological products versus the WHO guideline on procedures and data requirements for change to approved biotherapeutics products. Why we have chosen this one? Because it's quite recent. Well, it's 2018, but it is one that is quite recent, and we were particularly interested to focus on the biologics first. So if we move to the next slide. So these are the results of the step one. So the step one is to understand what are the post-approval change regulatory frameworks worldwide. And for that, 10 questions were asked to Clarivate, and Clarivate digged into the database, the public database, and all sources that were available to understand an answer to those 10 general questions. So the first question was, is there any regulation on variations in the country? So in the 21 countries selected, and 100% of the countries had regulations or guidance on variations. So this is a first good stick on the ground. And then we ask for risk-based categorization. So is there any risk-based categorization for changing those regulation or guidance? And again, all the countries that were studied had a risk-based categorization for changes, but the only difference was that some change were classified in major and minor. So some countries did not have a moderate classification, and this moderate classification was contemplated in only 9 countries. So if we move to the next slide, then we ask about the timeline. So is there any timeline for approval, yes or no? And again, most countries have timelines for approval. The difference between countries is, for example, for the notification, there is a 0 to 60 days for timelines for minor variation, because some countries need some administrative step, which is taking 60 days. For major variation, the span of time between submission and approval is between 30 days to 270 days. So a very wide variation in terms of target timelines. And this is not the timelines that we experience. This is in practice. This is really the theoretical timelines that are applied in regulations or guidance. Then we ask also for grouping of changes. So is it possible to group or bundle changes? So we understand grouping as if you have the same variation, but it's applying to multiple products, or if you have multiple variations that are applied to the same product. So quite flexible definition. And we could see that a huge number of countries allow the grouping of changes, so like 95%. If we move to the next slide, specific guideline on variation for biotherapeutics. Is there any specific guideline on variation for biotherapeutics? Yes or no? So about 57%, so half of the country do have a specific guideline for variation on biotherapeutics. And with regard to reliance, 43% of countries allow reliance for variations. So if we move to the next slide, then we also ask for other questions related to enablers to a PACS regulatory framework. So for example, submission format, and reliance for PACS. So the first question was about the submission format. So is CTD allowed? And 86% of the countries allow CTD and eCTD. And then 14% of countries have other CTD formats requested or allowed, like, for example, the Asian CTD. Then we ask for applicability to other modalities, so any PACS variation or guidance specific to other modalities, and 76% of countries have some other modalities under scope, like vaccines, blood products, or GMPs and cell and gene therapies with specific variation guidance for those modalities. And then we ask for grace period for implementation. So 62% of countries include grace period, meaning that you have between 6 to 12 months to implement the change. And then scientific advice, 52% of the countries offer scientific advice. So if we summarize the outcome of this, we will see in the next slide, but I need to move on. So next slide. So this is the outcome of the second part of the study, which is about the level of convergence of specific PACS versus WHO. And in a nutshell, we studied 3 parameters. The first one is about the categorization of changes. The second one is about the requirements. And the last one is about the time frames. And we studied 5 different changes. So it's a bit tiny, but so we studied manufacturing facility change, process change, pharmacopoeia change, specification change, and shelf life change. And we compared how this is handled in those countries compared to the WHO guideline. And you can see the level of convergence. So the greener it is, the dark green means it's convergence to WHO. And then medium green is you have 2 parameters that are aligned with WHO, and low convergence is when you have 1 or none of the parameters that are aligned. So you can see a great level of convergence, of divergence, between countries and between regions. And especially you can see in Asia Pacific, here 1 country is fully convergent with WHO, and others are not convergent at all, or more or less convergent. But so if we study that in more, so if we move to the next slide, this is the project takeaways that we have seen. We have seen that all countries have risk categorization, timelines, allow grouping, but 86% of them accept CTD. But what we have seen as well is that only 57% of countries have specific guidance for PACS, 52% have scientific advice, 48% have Reliance. So half, let's say. And then we also have seen that the level of convergence between countries and WHO is extremely diverse for biologics, especially pharmacopoeia compliance change are convergence because it's minor in most countries, but facility change are the least convergent type of change in 17 countries for both drug substance and drug product. So if you move to the next, which is the conclusion, this survey highlights, is coherent with other publication that we have made on post-approval change and Reliance use for PACS. And we can see that the global regulatory convergence would enable a more efficient management of PACS, especially when specifically adapted to biologics, and that establishing those variation guidelines in line with international standards like WHO that we have studied as a benchmark, or ICHQ-12, in terms of categorization, requirements, and timelines, is really an enabler to allow to compare more easily post-approval change when applying Reliance. So it will facilitate the expansion of Reliance. And we will share those results in a publication that we want to publish before the end of the year on IFPMA website. And if you are interested in having more in-depth dialogue or in-depth discussion on the results of these findings, we're happy to share more details after this session. So thank you very much for your attention. I'm pleased to take any question afterwards. And I want to thank the whole team of companies that have been working on this survey for 6 months this year.
So many thanks, Isabel, for this comprehensive overview. And now we are asking you for questions about the research results for detailed information. So feel free to also approach IFPMA. And when you go to the next slide, I want to invite now all of the participants before we go to the presentation from Australia. We want to invite all participants to give a pool, and Sergio, correct me when I'm wrong, to go for you because you have listened now to 2 presentations about post-approval changes. And there's no time for the tea now. We want you to ask the pool, what are the barriers to reliance on post-approval changes? Please go for a single choice. Is it legal barriers? Is it divergence in regular requirements or processes? Is it difference in the dossier which is submitted? Or is it any other things? What do you think? Please let us know the pool. And we are looking forward for the feedback. Please click one and let me know what you think about. if you click for others, please add in the Q&As what you understand under others. So did everybody has a chance? That's great. So the most one is a divergence in requirements or processes. That's a good point. Divergence in requirements and processes. How does it look on the next step? And the next step is actually the inspection part. And may I invite Stephen for that with a quick overview about the GMP inspection reliance. So now we go from the assessment towards the GMP, and let us know about the PICS process and what TGA, the Therapeutic Good Administration in Australia, how they are implementing that. Stephen, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Stefan. Thanks, everyone, and thank you for having me. My name is Stephen Farrell. I'm Director of the TGA's GMP Inspection Reliance Framework. I'm also the Chair of the PICS Inspection Reliance Working Group. If you can go to the next slide, please. So just a very brief overview today of the PICS inspection reliance work that we're doing, and also a little bit on what TGA specifically does. But the main point I wanted to make is that inspection reliance is an inherent paramount importance to PICS, and has been since their origins as a pharmaceutical inspection convention, where it was more focused on recognition back then, but since it's moved into a scheme, it's very much focused on reliance between participating authorities. Its prominent role in the current PIC strategic plan, where the main work of the Inspection Reliance Working Group that I chair is to promote the greater use of reliance amongst participating authorities, and to provide a forum to continuously monitor and improve upon the implementation of reliance. Next slide, please. So the working group, the reason it was established following the adoption of the GMP inspection reliance procedure, which was developed as part of IFPMA and adopted by PICS in 2018, what we found was that the uptake of inspection reliance across participating authorities was a little bit inconsistent. So the Subcommittee on Strategic Development in PICS established a working group in October 2020 to try and understand what were the barriers to reliance and how we could promote it more amongst the PICS family. Members of the group include EMA, FDA, Canada, MHRA, Swissmedic, and Visa and HSA, and it's chaired by myself and the TGA. Next slide, please. So one of the first things the working group had to do was understand how each of the members of the working group actually used reliance within their own borders and their own jurisdictions and for inspections in third countries. That took up a good bit of time whilst we learned from each other. That gave us a lot of insight into how the different approaches were used and what were the barriers amongst ourselves. But the main piece of work that the group obviously determined that was needed was a very in-depth inspection reliance survey sent out to all participating authorities. That was performed in 2022. It was a very detailed survey that broke down and gave clarification on a lot of different reliance types that were used across each of our own authorities. So from recognition to full reliance to partial reliance, and even a term coined supplementary reliance. We sent this survey out to all authorities, and we got a great response back. We also asked what were the main barriers to inspection reliance and what were the opportunities for greater reliance. The main barriers were not really surprising in that legislation obviously proved to be one of the biggest roadblocks to inspection reliance, and other factors such as details of inspection reports and language, etc., were considered to be quite small and easily overcome, but still barriers nonetheless to the efficiency, I guess, in uptaking of inspection reliance. The working group, I guess, took all the feedback from the survey and made a number of quite lofty and short, medium, and long-term recommendations to the PICS Committee of Officials. These ranged from common sense or approaches such as shared databases globally amongst regulators, which again is quite a lofty recommendation to make, and obviously something that's in a long-term goal and not within our control maybe to develop. So the work of the group at the moment is very much focused on some of our shorter and medium-term recommendations, which was included updating the inspection reliance procedure to provide clarification on terminology, which was mentioned in some of the earlier presentations around that, how that can be confusing and misconstrued in different jurisdictions, and to try and promote it and have pilot programs to see how we could develop more work and leverage off each other. And the main kind of, I guess, most exciting pilot to come from that is the pilot single inspection program, which is currently being run. Next slide, please. So the pilot single inspection program is a trilateral pilot from members of the Inspection Reliance Working Group. So ourselves in TGA, Health Canada, and the UK's MHRA. It's focused on facilities that are located outside the borders of PICS participating authorities. Again, we're trying to very much promote the use of the existing inspection reliance processes within PICS jurisdictions. The pilot is very much trying to focus on facilities that manufacture and supply product to all three jurisdictions as members of the pilot, but we have performed an inspection of the site where it was just two. But the main aim of the pilot is obviously to establish a coordinated approach using our inspection resources, and similarly to other pilots. And the main goal of inspection reliance, and as mentioned by EDA colleagues earlier on, is to reduce duplication of inspections and to leverage off the work of our international colleagues as much as possible. Next slide, please. So I wanted to give a little bit of an overview of how the TGA uses GMP inspection reliance. So the TGA's GMP clearance framework, which is the term we use for our inspection reliance process, has been around for decades, well over 20 years. And it's essentially a desktop inspection reliance evaluation of GMP evidence that's produced following an on-site inspection by a recognized regulatory authority. So an inspection by another authority with whom the TGA has an agreement or an arrangement with forms the foundation for our inspection reliance work. The extent of additional information then, I guess the depth of the desktop audit or desktop inspection that we perform is really predicated on a number of factors. The focus of the GMP clearance framework is a little bit more product focused, and our legislation means that when we do an inspection reliance procedure, it's for the purpose of a marketing authorization only. It's not to go and inspect a site in general terms, like a licensing scheme for overseas. It's very much linked to a specific product, so it's quite focused. Another difference is that when we perform our inspection reliance evaluations, we don't actually issue GMP certification to the facility that we evaluate. However, there's a clearance or an approval issued to the marketing authorization applicant or holder, not to the manufacturers themselves. Next slide, please. So many factors can influence how much we rely on another authority's inspection. The equivalence that we've established with the other regulatory authority, how much confidence and history, I guess, we have with them and knowledge of their processes. The agreement that underpins the work that we've done, is it a binding agreement or just a non-binding agreement, for example? a real broad or in-depth understanding of how they apply, how they use GMP within their regulatory framework. And we always try to align as much as possible. So like regulatory convergence or alignment is a term that's often used. And that's what we try to do, is recognizing we don't do things exactly the same way all the time, but trying to do a gap analysis and align where possible to try and either implement a mitigation strategy or to address any potential risks that might be at the facility. Next slide, please. So Australia has quite a unique regulatory framework, I guess, in comparison to some other jurisdictions. And that means that we actually put a lot of emphasis onto our inspection reliance framework to try and cover the gaps we have domestically. So that influences our inspection reliance approach. We don't have a qualified person framework, for example. We don't have retesting on import. We don't have a federally regulated good distribution program. It's more monitored by our states and territories. So it creates challenges for us then in terms of what other jurisdictions, how they can use Reliance. So the TGA's inspection reliance procedure really kind of tries to bridge the gap in some of the gaps we have in our domestic framework. And that's why the level of our evaluation that we perform really varies depending on where the goods are being sourced from and where the manufacturer is located. Next slide, please. So it's just a final wrap up, I guess, from TGA's perspective, and it's our long-standing view that inspection reliance and reliance in general is a crucial component to product lifecycle management. Over 90% of medicines that are supplied to Australia come from overseas. This is a snapshot of the countries in which we perform our inspection reliance processes because we're sourcing products from them. So it's a hugely important tool that we use, and we take the role of leading the work in PICS very seriously to try and promote this as much as possible. So yeah, with that, I'd like to hand back to Stefan. So thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Stephen, for this introduction, what TGA does and how PICS see Reliance. Before we now go to the panel discussion, I want to wake up all the participants again with our second pool question. And this is about, before you type the questions to the answer, and this is about another question on Reliance, similar question, what are the barriers to Reliance now for inspection, with again the same answers: legal barriers, divergence in regulatory process or requirements, and difference in the dossier submitted, as well as others. So please check the next one. Some more seconds. What do you think? Let us know. Any final thoughts? And here are the results. Seems about similar results as we had before, but now the majority is really with the divergence in requirements or processes. With this, many thanks to the IFPMA administration for this one. And let's now go to the panel discussion, and please put your question into the Q&A. It will pop up to the screen. And for the upcoming panel discussion, I invite all of the speakers, Hamada, Isabel, and Stephen, to join us. And I also invite Achimira from the Thailand FDA. And I want to kick off the discussion with you and ask you, what does the Thai FDA apply Reliance on GMP inspections or on post-approval changes? Can you elaborate on that and give a brief overview of the different approaches in place there in Thailand?
Thank you, IFPMA for inviting Thai FDA to join in this conference, and thank you to Stefan for a brief overview of me. For the question that you raised to me, the Thai FDA apply the Reliance pathway in the GMP inspection. We call it GMP clearance of overseas manufacturers of the post-approval chains as well. Our main approach, we divide into the two categories, like the recognition pathway through the MRA, such as the ASEAN listed inspection service. The inspection result from the ASEAN listed inspection service are accepted based on the recognition pathway. This is a legal binding. It means that normally 100% accepted without any conduct for the inspection. And for the second is the Reliance pathway. We also rely on the other PICS participating authority and WHO listed authority, as well as WHO pre-qualification program result, operating with the trust and the confidence to avoid the unnecessary duplication of the GMP inspection work. The inspection report, as well as the GMP compliance statement, GMP certificate, and some necessary documents are required, and the database and the desk assessment were performed. However, if we have some issue during document assessment, the application may be rejected or reconsidered, and sometimes on-site inspection may be conducted. And the Thai FDA strives to align its GMP inspection processes with international standards such as PICS and WHO as well, to facilitate the smoother collaboration among regulatory agencies. Thank you.
Yeah, many thanks for this brief introduction and your words. And let me ask the next question to Hamada. You presented about Reliance. What do you think? Can you elaborate if Reliance must be mutual or if it can also be unilateral? What do you think?
We use the unilateral model in Egypt, in EDA. Mutual reliance is good, but is mostly not available because it needs legal binding agreements between authorities. So the unilateral reliance make more benefits through applying the technical requirement of the files and using the unilateral reliance, giving best results because it doesn't go to legal requirement that may take another time and may take longer time.
Yeah, that's great. Many thanks. And my next question goes to Stephen. You presented about a new inspection pilot, and I think Australia is very great in presenting so many inspection pilots. And there are two elements of the question. Number one, what do you think, is a new pilot needed, or is it time for implementation? And the second one, with regard to implementation, could we expand the Reliance beyond the GMP inspections, for instance, also to rely on local batch release testing, for instance, also for post-market surveillance, and focus the work on post-market surveillance in order to get rid of the duplicated batch testing? What do you think?
Thanks for the question. In terms of pilots, I think, it's you have to kind of start small and get a good foundation when establishing any new approach or innovative approaches to Reliance. I think it's always beneficial to try and do that in a small setting with perhaps regulators you have a good relationship with, and I think that's been our experience on the single inspection program so far. The TGA and MHRA and Health Canada have a long history of working really, really well and really closely together. That's been really beneficial in terms of how the pilot has run to date. It's been quite informal, which has allowed us to actually progressed quite rapidly through the pilot, and each authority has performed an inspection to date already, and there's been a lot of lessons learned. So ideally, we'd look to then expand this a little bit more moving forward, but obviously it's dependent on other jurisdictions and their preferences and their approaches and their workloads as well. So there's multi-factors that go into it. In terms of the broader reliance question, I think as has been demonstrated by my colleagues and their previous presentations, I do think there's always an opportunity for reliance, I guess, if there's an appetite. And I think that's something that all regulatory authorities in this modern global environment really need to consider, is not only how can I rely on others, and how can I take that information and incorporate it into our own sovereign decision making, which is still really important. We're all sovereign nations and we have to make our own decisions, but how can we leverage off the great work of others, and how can we understand what they do, but also how can we perform our work that facilitates reliance of, you know, outwards from the work that we do. You know, so kind of being conscious of our day-to-day role and how we can do it in a way that promotes greater reliance from everybody else. So I think there's an opportunity across all fields for greater reliance.
Yeah, many thanks. This sounds good. My next question goes to Isabel, and this is a question asked in the chat. What are your thoughts on expanding reliance for advanced therapies, especially as they are specialized and precision medicines?
I think that we have a position on reliance for ATMPs that we have put also for QC testing, by the way. So I think it's interesting to answer to the previous question that reliance for QC testing, import testing and release testing is possible. And we have a specific position for ATMP. I think that for complex products, reliance for MA or reliance on packs for TMP is something that may be feasible because I think it's a case by case. What scope you want to target for when you want to implement a reliance framework. So it depends on the health needs, the priorities of a particular country. It depends on the capability of the assessors, the capability and resource available. And for sure, I think that for ATMPs, if it is a priority in terms of health needs or in terms of rare disease, for example, if it's an unmet need, and if it's also is an opportunity for capacity building, I think that it is great to include also ATMP. But I think there is no rule. I think that you should do this, you should do this. I think it depends on each country to put in the scope which kind of products are eligible, again, depending on their resource and their health needs.
Yeah. Okay, many thanks, Isabel. I saw a note that IFPMA also has a point to make on this question. If this is correct, please jump in.
No, thanks, Stefan. It was just to mark Isabel's answer. Thank you.
Yeah, okie doke. Thanks so much. So my next question then is to Aisha, and this is about, we heard a lot about reliance. What is, from your perspective, which resources can be leveraged to expedite reliance? What do you think? You're on mute.
Okay, for the resources can expedite the post-approval chain and the reliance. I think, in my opinion, the resources, maybe the collaboration and the capacity building of the human resources to enhance, and we have to seek more agreement or arrangement for the international to drive for the reliance in the future. And this is the key that promoting the international collaboration. And I think this is maybe to promote the quicker and ensure the efficient for the approval process. and maintain high standard. The collaboration, networking, as well as the technology to link with other agency and harmonization may be the resources. Thank you.
Yeah, many thanks. So I invite all participants to submit more questions if you have. Otherwise, I think the presenters have been very good in explaining the types, what they want to make. But I have maybe another question for Stephen. It's about how can technical frameworks interfere with the legal frameworks the different agencies have? What do you think?
I think it's obviously depends on how technical the technical frameworks are. I think that every authority has a certain level of nuance in their approaches, and I guess it's, you know, how that aligns with the regulatory frameworks and the sovereign decision making that we all have to make. So I think it's always case by case. It's difficult to say. I know for TGA we're quite fortunate that our legislation when it comes to GMP and inspections is quite high level or broad, which allows us a great deal of flexibility to implement technical frameworks, but in a non-statutory setting. So all around kind of guidance and website material. So it's not enshrined in our legislation and not, you know, very prescriptive, but therefore it's not as rigid. It allows us a lot of flexibility. So I think there's different ways though that you can achieve the same outcome. It obviously just depends on your legislative framework and then what are the technical aspects you want to try and introduce.
Yeah, that's great. Maybe I ask the same question to Hamada, how it looks like from the Egyptian authority and also not from an inspector, but more from a reviewer perspective. What do you think about how can technical frameworks interface with legal frameworks?
Okay, let me give a small explanation of our point of view in this part. I think the technical part of Reliance is more important than the legal part. We all need to learn from the practice of mature agencies and from agencies that we don't put in our reference countries, but also they have a great practice in technical assessment. So we don't need to stop for legal reliance only, but we have to expand our reliance to technical reliance as well as the legal reliance. For example, if I can explain my point of view, it is not enough to get a CPP of approval. You need to learn from how this approval have been released. As long as you review the technical part, you may make two things: update your national guidelines and add to the assessor capability, and you don't wait for the legal requirement to be here, so you apply Reliance. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much. And the last question maybe to Isabel, and this is about, we have learned a lot of things of Reliance, but when we look at the literature and other presentation, many people talk about recognition or convergence. What is, from the industry point of view, the difference between that?
So I think that it's quite well known now, but I can convergence. It's when it's not harmonization. Harmonization is really when it's exactly the same, but convergence is when you all strive to have similar categories of requirements, similar, major, moderate, and minor, similar requirements, so supportive data and similar timelines. For PACS, we recommend the ICHQ 12 because there is a classification in chapter 2, but also WHO guideline, because WHO guideline for change to biotherapeutics, as an example, is really very detailed in terms of categorization, recommended timelines, and in terms of supportive data for submission of PACS. There are other models like EU for sure. Variation guidelines is also another model that is also adopted by countries. It is changing right now, but it is still applied in some countries for the categorization. But I think it helps for sure, this convergence, to have the same umbrella framework for then applying Reliance, because if you do not use the same risk-based categorization, it's not so easy then to rely. If a country would consider something high risk, and then it would be considered minor or moderate in the reference country. So that's for convergence. Then for Reliance, so Reliance, the definition, I don't have it by heart, but it's very well defined in the WHO guidance on good Reliance practice. And it's basically to take into consideration the assessment made by an authority to do your own assessment, but without losing your own sovereignty in decision making. And the difference with recognition is that recognition is at a higher level, because recognition, you must have a legal framework. You must have an agreement or a memorandum of understanding, because not only you assess based on the assessment of the stringent regulatory authority or the reference regulatory authority, but you also legally recognize the approval. So this is really at another level. And there are examples of recognition. For example, the centralized procedure in IFPMA is a recognition. We have also MRA for inspection, mutual recognition agreements. But I think these are different levels. And there is a specific figure done by WHO that is very, very explicit on the different levels of and definition of reliance. And it's really a lot of many opportunities to apply. So with collaborative pathway, reliance pathways, work sharing, etc., etc.
Yeah, many thanks, Isabel. That's good. You see, mutual recognition is actually a trade agreement, and also governments have to agree that. This makes it more complex and more divergent to reach that. With that, I want to conclude this Q&A session. I want to thank our panelists and can give you, at least from my side, a big applause for your presentation and discussions. You can do it with online. I think you have also a clap your hands button there. Many thanks for this one. And maybe I ask to move to the recommendations. I think we have prepared one slide to put all together here. And this is about, if the slide is sharing, we have 3 takeaways from my perspective. First is of all that we should try to standardize variation categories for post-approval changes, and especially what is written here in the second line, to adopt a clear classification schemes, because it's easier to see if we have moderate major changes that this is harmonized, and ICH Q12 can help in that, but there are also additional training material on ICH Q12, and please also recognize that they are also published at the ICH webpage. Secondly, when we adopt documentation requirements for post-approval change reliance process, it should be also harmonized categories. Based on these harmonized categories, there should be a clear classification scheme, such as prior approval, notification, etc., to have flexibility also with the local elements, and also informed reliance process with streamlined documentation can help here to go forward. And last but not least, on the foster the practical GMP inspection reliance with good frameworks to build trust among inspectorates, with PICS participating authorities to collaborate there and go for unilateral reliance, where also several speakers focused on that we not only have to go to mutual reliance, but also unilateral reliance also helps. And also the EMA, European Medicines Agency, runs a successful pilot on that. And then we have also the opportunity, besides that, to reduce duplication and or even length of inspections. And at least in our company, we had a good example that one agency said after 3 days, many thanks, we have seen everything, you are great, we go because you have a low risk score. So this is what we can do. I hope you enjoyed this session and thanks for listening. And with that, I give back to Sergio for closing out this second part and closing out the day. Thanks so much from my side.
Thanks, Stefan, and many thanks for our speakers and all the participants. It was really a wonderful day of discussions about Reliance. Just a reminder that you will be able to find the presentations and the recording on our website at the end of the conference. And also a reminder that, as you see in the chat, we'll have a poll coming up just to get some feedback from participants, whether you liked today's discussions. And a reminder for you to join us tomorrow for day 3 of Asia Regulatory Conference from 7:30 to 10:30 Central European Time, where you'll be able to hear about e-labeling as a pathway for future universal labeling and combination products, preparing regulatory systems for advanced therapies and combination products. So those are the 2 sessions for tomorrow. Thanks so much, everyone, and hope to see you online for the rest of the conference. Bye-bye.